When We Had Feathers. Tales from the Angel's Share, Volume 6. By Marella Sands. Read by Rett MacPherson. Chapter 1. "How stupid can you be?" shouted my boss Ware at myself and my boyfriend Castro. Castro looked cowed, but I wasn't. I didn't care if Ware were angry. This was his fault. Everything was his fault. Anger rose up my throat. "Well, frankly, I don't know," I spat out, "because you haven't said. Maybe if you would like me to make good choices, you should provide good information first." Ware opened his mouth and then closed it again. His red face faded slightly, and his breathing slowed. The whiskey bottles behind him rattled slightly where they stood on the glass shelves behind the bar. Weird. But then, that's what you got for working for a supernatural creature. "I haven't wanted to burden you with everything all at once," he said, still loudly and only somewhat more reasonably. "There's so much." "Because you're immortal, and this war you all had with each other spanned galaxies and destroyed them," I said. Castro blanched at that. Surely I'd mentioned the war involving the destruction of stars and galaxies my boss had been involved in, the one where he'd been the general in one camp and his best friend had led the other. Brother against brother, with creatures that didn't have brothers as far as I knew, but they did have friends, lovers, love triangles even. It should have been boring like any stupid rom-com where the girl can't choose between the nice guy and the bad boy. Except with these guys, there was that galaxy-destroying aspect to it, and the part where that war was heating up again. The war my boss believed I'd be playing a major part in. Like any human could do much against an entire race that could do things like snuff out stars. Castro shook his head. "Look, I have no idea what's going on here, but it's clear. Teryl has to have a higher level of knowledge, whether you like it or not, whether it's a good idea or not." "No one asked you," barked my boss. "Hey," I said, "you speak to him like that again and I'm out of here." Ware actually did a double take, which was something I'd only read about. People don't actually do that, right? Except Ware acted as if he'd been struck and his eyes got wide. The brand on my right palm, the one that spelled out Ware's name in some archaic script that I doubted had even been developed on this planet, suddenly struck me with a burning pain. I clenched my hand into a fist and managed not to yelp. I couldn't help but clamp my mouth shut and grimace, though. Ware noticed. The struggle to control his emotions raged across his face a few moments before he managed to take a deep breath. My heart slowed slightly. I might not take any guff off my boss, but that didn't make him any less scary. "Fine," he said. "Describe what was taken. I know what it should be, but maybe I'm wrong." "It was a red feather," I said. "A small one, soft, almost like down. It protected me from the fire at Cahokia, but it doesn't look anything like what, you looked like before." "Before?" asked Castro. His dark eyes were puzzled. "Before Earth?" I asked. "Before the war? I don't really know. It was just that for a little while I saw Oya the way she appeared in the past. All angles and crystal and metal." Those words bothered me. What I had seen hadn't really fit into what I thought of as crystalline or metallic, but those were the best words I had. No softness, no fluffy wings, nothing that you'd recognize from an Earth-based myth or legend. I looked at Ware expectantly. "That was indeed one of our forms," he said. "Originally, we didn't have physical form. We just existed. But we learned to manipulate matter to the point where we could create bodies. We sailed the void on wings constructed out of materials you have no words for. You couldn't even imagine the life we led back then." Of that, I had no doubt. "And now you run a bar in St. Louis?" asked Castro. "Isn't that a bit of a come down?" "Depends on what you mean by that," said Ware. He glanced around the dimly lit interior of the Angel's Share bar, which he owned and which was technically still my place of employment. I hadn't actually had a regular shift in a while, not since Ware had decided to pay me just to stick around and run errands for him. You know, because I was important to the cause or whatever. "No, we don't travel between the stars anymore, but that doesn't mean life on Earth doesn't have its attractions and benefits." I tried to imagine living on Earth as an ordinary person after having spent millions, if not billions, of years going anywhere in the universe I wanted, seeing creation and destruction everywhere as stars were born, lived, and died around me. And then settling for a human-looking body and a life among barely sentient apes with a penchant for pollution, cruelty, and ennui. Many people manage to live boring, colorless lives of only a few decades. How could one live on Earth and not eventually get bored like that? It would take longer, I would suppose, than decades, but eventually, how boring would life on Earth be? So, back to the feather, I said, dismissing the fantastical vision of sailing the universe on wings. I bit back a yawn. Jet lag sucked. I'd just gotten into town from London a little over a day ago and wasn't yet recovered from the flight, not to mention all the walking and running and fighting the entire trip had involved. It belongs to one of you? You know whose it is, he said. Who hasn't been around lately? I'd hardly been at the bar enough lately to know who was in and out as per usual. But clearly Ware thought I should know who hadn't been in, which meant I should consider the short list of the people who came often. People with red flecks in their hair and irises, perhaps? The same red as the feather? Fish, I said. Ware nodded. Castro visibly relaxed. Oh, fish? I thought you meant one of those, like those who, tried to kill you, I asked. Yeah, them. Marvo and Garnet wouldn't have bothered to wait until the apartment was empty before breaking in and stealing something, said Ware baldly. Who knows, they might have broken in while you were there just to grab the feather and kill you as a bonus. Marvo had been with us on a trip to the Chain of Rocks Bridge a few weeks ago. I knew he was still a bad guy, but the situation was more complicated. He had no love of humans, but apparently had no stomach for opposing Ware, at least right now. It was difficult to tell with these creatures if they were in a mood to kill you, ignore you, or help you, and for what reason. Castro noticed I was still tense. What, isn't Fish a friend of yours? I don't think that counts exactly, I said. He's been alive since the dawn of time, basically. What's one mere mortal to all that? I looked at Ware, who seemed slightly embarrassed by the statement. That's more or less true, he said, somewhat apologetically. It can be difficult to really bond with a human when you know they'll be dead in a mere flicker of time. But some do, I said, thinking of a few of the stories I'd heard about love affairs between Ware's kind, who called themselves the Forlorn, and humans. Lucy had that lover 1,000 years ago. She's still not over. Ware gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Oya and Mia, I said. At those names, Ware's face darkened. Castro noticed. What's wrong with Oya and Mia? I snorted. Well, I know what I think is wrong with them, but I believe Ware has a different opinion. Ware shook his head. That's neither here nor there. Fish is our concern right now. He has one of his own feathers back. That's not good. Okay, I said slowly, but how bad can it be? Shouldn't you all have feathers around Earth somewhere? No, he said. I was liking this new informative Ware. When we agreed to get rid of our wings and become truly earthbound, we destroyed them, down to the last feather. I remembered the longing of Oya's to have her wings back. Everyone agreed to this, knowing you'd miss them as badly as you do? We all agreed, said Ware softly, because there were other things to compensate. We knew one day we'd get back to our old lives, that the stars wouldn't be put off forever. But in the meantime, our wings were crippling us, not helping us. We cut them off and destroyed them. This feather shouldn't exist. But it does, said Castro. And now Fish has one of his own feathers back. So what, he wears it as an earring or something? I mean, what's so bad about a single feather? Ware pursed his lips together. And you were just in a sharing mood, I said. You might as well tell us. After all, you're the one who's upset Fish has it when you wanted it for yourself. I didn't want it for me, said Ware. I've been trying to collect all the talismans and store them away where no one else can use them. You mean no one besides you, said Castro. Ware's anger returned. Of course, no one besides me. I trust myself. I don't trust others. Any of them could be working for him. Lucy's already demonstrated that she's still in his camp. Others may be as well. I thought for a moment. I didn't necessarily trust Ware with my life or Castro's life. After all, he was immortal and we weren't. We couldn't rate very high on his list of priorities, but some of the other Forlorn seemed to trust him over this rival of his because Ware was more of a laissez-faire boss, while the other guy was much more of a micromanager who wanted to control everything and everyone around him. Of the two, I suppose I'd trust Ware more, but that didn't necessarily make him trustworthy. What can he do with it, I asked. Control fire? Change the weather? Bring down buildings? Worse, said Ware. His face paled. How much worse? I asked, fear clawing at my heart. If this could frighten my boss, it had to be scary. Worse, Ware said softly. He could bring back his old form, his old self. One of us in that form would be enough to do whatever we wanted with life on Earth, including destroy it. Destroy it? I repeated, like he could wipe out all life on Earth. People? Asked Castro. Animals? Plants? Bacteria even? People, said Ware, and everything else too. But most certainly, as of the moment Fish had that feather in his hand, humans were looking extinction in the face. I sank onto a bar stool. Extinction? At Fish's hands? I couldn't square a word like extinction with the low-key barfly I knew as Fish. The door behind me opened wildly and a cold wind slammed into my back. "Where?" shouted someone. "We have a problem."